Well, welcome everyone. My name is Nathan. I'm one of the pastors here at Park Hill United Methodist Church. Use the pronouns he, him, and his. Welcome to this time of conversations with experts. Today, we're being joined by Kamau Allen, who is a community organizer for Together Colorado, amongst many other things. We're going to be having a conversation today, following our theme as we wrapped up our worship series today, Keeping the Faith Through COVID-19 on community, talking about isolation and loneliness and how community helps us to be able to combat some of those feelings during this time of social distancing. I'm going to invite, I didn't tell her I would do this, but if she's still on our call, I'm going to invite Pastor Laura as she feels fit and called to chime in with questions as well as she gave our word today from the book of Hebrews. But today we're joined by my friend, our colleague, Kamau Allen, again, who's a community organizer. He and I crossed paths probably about 2 or 3 years ago. He started to work with Together Colorado, specifically on getting slavery out of our Colorado Constitution. He'll probably share more about that here in just a few minutes as well. He joined us for our study that we did on our kids over here at my wife Alicia's and ours house as part of the Justice League, as we were doing some pre-work before our mentoring program with Hallett Academy. And so I've gotten to know him and appreciate him, and he's become a friend. And so happy to have him, grateful for him spending some time with us this morning as we dive into the conversation about community. So Kamau, I'm sure there's much more to share and to tell about your story, but would you just give us a little introduction about who you are, your work with Together Colorado, and your larger work in our community? Welcome.
And thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here with you all and to see y'all's faces. My name is Kamau Allen. I was born under the name of Clarence Allen III. And because of that, there's actually some familiar faces here that would probably remember me by that name. But anyway, yeah, you know who you are. It's an honor to work in community. I have been a community organizer since, or at least I started calling myself that since 2014. After going out to Ferguson to protest the murder of Michael Brown by the hands of Ferguson PD, and since then I have been doing my best to put myself on the front lines when it comes to especially criminal justice issues. I work officially with Together Colorado as a community organizer, and I head up the criminal justice side of things within the organization, but I do a bunch of other things as well. So it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Kamau. So share with us a little bit. I've heard different versions of the story, bits and pieces, but tell us a little more specifically about the Michael Brown and Ferguson and how that really drawed you out and to be more involved in community organizing specifically, or just in general, the idea of community and the power of community.
The What happened in Ferguson was one of the most important political events in my generation. Um, Before then, you know, growing up, my parents had told me stories about the civil rights movement, what they had experienced. Um, and they told these stories to caution me as I got older and as I appeared more and more threatening to white folks. Um, but Ferguson was, you know, the embodiment of my parents' stories about police dogs and about you know, just a major demonstration for, you know, the fight for Black lives. And I had never seen anything like that to that scale before. I was too young to actually I wasn't even around during the Rodney King incident, which was also my family's neighborhood. But I I was hanging out with my friends. I was going to Howard University at the time, and we looked on our phones and we saw that St. Louis was trending. And so I clicked on, I clicked on it, and the first thing I saw was a young man's body laid face down in the middle of the street with blood coming out from under him. And I couldn't look at it at first. Like I had seen, you know, images of police shootings and police killings before, but I thought, well, maybe this would be one of those cases where people forget about it 2 weeks from now. But 4.5 hours later, his body was still there. By that time, people started coming out of their houses. They started getting out of their cars. They started asking questions. Why isn't his body covered? They left him uncovered for about 3 of those 4.5 hours. Somebody had to go into their house and grab a bed sheet and ask the police to cover the boy's body. It was no wonder why Ferguson erupted the way that it did. I wanted to go in August 2014. A bunch of students were taking a freedom ride from Washington, D.C. to St. Louis, and a bunch of students who went were from that neighborhood. They knew the officer who shot and killed Mike Brown, and they knew him by nicknames because he had terrorized a group of Black women the summer before that. And so, unfortunately, my name wasn't called on the roll because they had a limited number of seats. But one of the students there lost her eyesight because a non-lethal round was fired into the crowd of peaceful protesters, and she's still blind to this day. These were the images that we saw from a distance. The tear gas, the fires, the public question about whether or not we matter. And all of that was stirring up my spirit in ways that nothing ever did before. But around November 2014, the prosecutor, Robert McCullough, was about to make his announcement about whether or not the grand jury was going to indict Officer Darren Wilson. And I was with a bunch of students when the announcement was made. At the time, a lot of classes were canceled. A lot of businesses were shut down because they didn't know if we were going to go riot too. So National Guard was on standby and everything. And when Robert McCullough decided to make the announcement that there will be no indictment against the officer, Ferguson erupted again. DC was in protest, and I went straight up to my room and I started packing my bags. My girlfriend at the time asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to St. Louis." "How you getting there?" "I don't know." "What you gonna do when you get there?" "I don't know." She said, "Where are you gonna stay?" I said, "I'll sleep on the sidewalk if I have to, but I'm going." So the first person I called up was Pastor Tyler from my home church, Shorter Amy. And he asked me, "Son, why are you going to a city you never been to and a neighborhood you never heard of to fight for a young man you never knew? If you can be doing this work here in DC or in your hometown, Denver." And I stopped and I thought about it. And that was the first time I really pulled all those pieces together. The times when I've been stopped and harassed by police, the times that I've been confronted by skinheads when I was 13, to my family's experiences with the criminal justice system. I realized right then and there that I'm going not because I knew Mike Brown, but because I could be Mike Brown. And a lot of us young people saw ourselves in Mike Brown. We saw ourselves laying on the concrete for 4.5 hours. And so that's what got me involved in organizing. Ferguson is sacred to this movement. Ferguson is sacred to my own transformation as an organizer. I will always refer back to it when I tell my story. And so I went, and it changed my entire life.
Thank you for sharing that, Kamau. So it's been almost 6 years since you took that journey, and at one level, so much has changed, and then at another level, with the rulings and no indictments this week related to Breonna Taylor, nothing has changed. It can feel like. I'm going to ask kind of these two questions and combine them. You take them as you feel best. But we've been asking our experts throughout this series to talk a little bit specifically about how their field, so community organizing for you, has changed because of the pandemic, but also how you're doing your work now with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, so many folks protesting and marching in support of Black Lives Matter. How has it changed? How is it the same? What talk a little more about some of that for us.
And it's changed in a way where I can't as easily go and grieve with people in person, at least not as easily. Um, the biggest challenge to community organizing is organizing when you don't have access to community. And so a part of that meant reimagining what it meant to be in community, to work, um, to have, for me, to have the privilege of working from home. And, just doing what I can from my screen sometimes felt inadequate. But when George Floyd was murdered, and when the case about Ahmaud Arbery was brought to light, and when Breonna Taylor's case started making momentum, I knew I'm going to have to answer a question that was asked to me in Ferguson and in Baltimore. What is your line? And by line, what is the limit that you are comfortable with? Because we were asked this right before we faced off with weapons that were pointed at us, and just military gear being sicked on us. The question that was asked was, what are you comfortable with to uphold that line? I know that during COVID, I found that my line is to be in the middle of protests, but only if I have a mask on. I will not go without a mask. So I found myself in two different spaces, working and organizing from home and calling people and organizing things and setting up meetings from home remotely, but also going out to protest and to grieve and to put my body on the line in ways that are more familiar to me.
You said two things that really stuck out to me, at least, Kamau, which the first was trying to reimagine what community looks like. I think Pastor Laura, in your sermon today, you even said something very similar, that I think probably pre-pandemic, we could list off what we expect community to look like and what that should feel like in our lives. And now we're having to reimagine that. So first, you talk a little more about that, Kamau. What do you mean by reimagining community? Where have you found new ways of being community, or how have you found new ways of being community that otherwise, back in February, you would have said, oh, we don't do community that way?
Yeah, so a good example is so the criminal justice work we do in Together Colorado, we try our best to be statewide, but we do always tend to be more Denver than anything else. Before the shutdown and before quarantine, I knew conceptually that the people organizing with us in Pueblo were a part of our community, but I had a hard time feeling that when you're like an hour and a half drive away. But when we transitioned to Zoom only meetings, I found myself in rooms with people who were from Pueblo and Boulder and all these other places that who had previously not been a part of our in-person meetings were now had access to our meetings because we're not traveling. So to me, it was a realization that physical proximity meant a lot more to me in my definition of community than I previously thought. Now, there have been other ways that things have been challenging, is that sometimes it's hard to stay in touch with people that you don't see regularly. So putting in the effort to maintain those close bonds during such a time of crisis, it's difficult. And it's also difficult when, when some of my friends were catching COVID and I couldn't go and see them. That was also challenging. So to me, before, I remember the exact date that I went into quarantine. It was March 13th. Before March 13th, I would always go and see my friends and my family when they were in a time of need. Funerals, sick illnesses, they got laid off or evicted, I would go and see them in person. But now I can't do that. And to love them through a screen is difficult. And this still difficult. I don't think I found my heart's, fulfillment with where we are right now. But we're dealt we're given the cards that we've got, trying to make things better. But
Yeah, for sure. You made me think about one of the things we keep sharing with our Park Hill community and with each of you is that our community is much bigger than perhaps we thought it was back in February. It's becoming much larger. The same idea. We've got folks that are now joining us either in these Zoom calls or worshiping with us online from across the metro area, but really across the country. And we've been able to bring folks in from other continents even to join us in worship or in some of these conversations. And so our idea of what community or who's part of our community is definitely changing. The other idea, as you told your story related to Ferguson and Michael Brown, and then doing this work now in 2020, is your limits. You talked about what is your limit or what is your line? What are you willing to do? And I think for each of us, I would imagine all of us, and maybe some of you will share your stories, what our line was in March perhaps has changed a little bit or has ebbed and flowed as the pandemic has gone on, especially as we're talking about community and being in relationship with people. Park Carolers, I don't know if I shared this little antidote of a story, but I know for much of the stay-at-home order, I was trying to follow what we're supposed to do. And as soon as that got lifted, I began to have conversations with some of my closest friends, my running buddies, and said, like, when are you guys ready to run? Are you ready to run? Are you willing to run? Because that was part of the community that I was missing. But how, that line changes. And so can you talk a little more about that, Kamau? Has that line changed for you as you're trying to build community, as you're trying to find community, whether that's professionally or even personally as the months have gone on, or as different things have happened out in the rest of the world that have asked you or pushed you to need to or want to change where that line is?
yeah, absolutely. So my line has changed. Um, the urgency that we're facing is unprecedented in my lifetime. And I imagine other people's lifetimes on this call as well. Um, when I think about the threats that we're facing, um, I feel like my line has changed in some regard with, the um, just reimagining like community that is not in close proximity to me. Like, for example, after the success of the Abolish Slavery campaign here in Colorado, um, we had been getting a lot of calls from folks from different states about how they can pretty much do the same thing this year and in the following year. So we went ahead and decided to create a national coalition of those states. And I know that my line was challenged by doing national organizing, organizing in different time zones, organizing with folks with far different backgrounds and motivations for getting involved with that fight. And so I really had to grow and expand my understanding of what it means to be a community organizer operating um, a national network from his bedroom. And so that was one way. But I feel like when it comes to the protest, I was reminded of a line that I previously held when I was in Ferguson in Baltimore, and had in some ways forgotten about that. I am willing to get arrested. I am willing to face uh, to face charges for engaging in peaceful protest. Um, I was reminded as we were running from riot cops that I am not willing to die. And that was something that I first encountered in Baltimore. That was first time I really ran for my life. And so I was reminded again of that line that I am not uh, willing to die in these streets.
Thank you, Kamau. So this might be a no-brainer, a question we take for granted, but why not just do this work by yourself? I don't even know if that's possible, but why not by yourself? Why with other people? Why aren't you on a street corner with a bullhorn yelling, for equal rights or for justice?
That's a great question because, man, if I could wake up tomorrow and have, solve mass incarceration by noon, that would be amazing. I wouldn't be on this call if I could do that, to be honest. Like, I'll have to tell you all about it and we can have some drinks later. But um, the reality is, a lot of folks enter this work individually, and I think that's great. I do believe in our individual capacity to do incredible things with raising awareness and, doing everything that you can, and I admire that. Um, but the reality is, as much as everyone here knows, we cannot and will not do this alone. This fight is a collective struggle. It is something that everybody needs to be concerned with. And when we do this work together, yeah, although there are some moments where it does feel a little bit slower, it is a constant reminder of our source of power. And Together Colorado, we notice that political power is built through different means and different ways. Like, if you have a couple $1,000,000, you can influence change. People who have empty pockets cannot. Similarly, if you are in an elected position, you can write things into law, or you can you can make policy changes and institutional changes as an individual. But when we are talking about community, collectively, we are both being harmed by these systems. That I know that there are people on this call who know people who've gotten evicted, who know people who have had addiction issues, know people who have had trouble accessing their medication, know people who have served time in jail, that we collectively suffer from these things. And because we don't have millions and millions of dollars, and because we are not in formally elected positions to change things, we have to realize that in order to build the power that's necessary, we have to understand that there's a third way of building power, which is through people. People are our number one go-to. I always say that I don't organize issues, I organize people. And I love to primarily organize with people who have been deeply impacted by the systems that we're facing. So that's why I organize with people. It's I would do this by myself if I could, but the reality is I know I can't. I need y'all.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely need each other. So let's make the jump a little bit from community organizing to community in more general. What is it about, or what is it from rather, community organizing? What skills, abilities, lessons have you learned that might help us when we're searching out to find community, especially in this time of the pandemic? Are there things that you could, tips or tricks, if you will, that words of encouragement that you could offer to us if we're feeling, or someone on the call, or someone who's watching later on and saying, man, I live by myself, or I live with a bunch of people, but I still feel really isolated or lonely. I'm not connecting with people. Are there any general words of advice you might offer to folks, Kamau?
Yeah. So my general advice, both within the pandemic and without, is do not feel compelled to have answers. Um, what's real ironic about this work is that we don't lead through answers, we lead through questions. A good organizer asks good questions. So the question of how do I get in a community is one thing. And once you're in community, when you look at the issues that are that are impacting you or the people that you love, the next set of questions that you have to ask is, well, what exactly am I looking at? When a few years ago, we were involved in a case where a young man connected to our organization was stopped at gunpoint in Montbello by DPD. And he was arrested and charged for something that he did not do. His mother was connected to our organization. And so we fought like crazy to get him free. He was misidentified through a procedure called show up identifications. Like it was pretty much where He was in handcuffs between two squad cars and two officers. And from about 50 feet away, at midnight, the police drove a woman who was a recent victim of a crime in the back of a police cruiser, drove up, slowed down to a rolling stop, and then sped off 4 seconds later. But what happened within those 4 seconds was the officer asked her, "Is this the person that tried to rob you?" She said, "Yes." And so within those 4.5 seconds, the young man was misidentified and he was suddenly facing charges that could result with 2 to 6 years of in prison for something he didn't do over a 4.5 second identification procedure. And so we packed the courtrooms. We wrote letters to the DA. The DA got the FBI involved. The FBI said that his that their investigation corroborates with his testimony, but the DA just would not drop the case. And so we kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, the last day before trial, the DA decided to drop the case, and the judge approved the motion to dismiss. What we asked immediately after that was, what the hell was that? Especially that identification procedure. We had so many questions. Was it even legal, what they did? If it's legal, is it popular? And if it's legal and popular, was it done correctly? Who's training on that? Are there ways to reform that? Who's in charge of this issue? So we had a whole bunch of questions, and we let those questions guide us. And through those questions, we found answers to each and every single one of those. Because of that, we found solutions to all those. So now where we are with that case, we are fighting to create statewide legislative change for the issue of eyewitness identification, particularly around show-ups. And we've already gotten some solid agreements for change from the police department. So anyway, my number one advice: lead through questions, lead through your story. Your story is what grounds you in the arc of humanity. I'm not here to just make social justice changes, but when we talk about the arc of when we talk about social justice, we're talking about a story. We're talking about the story of racial injustice, how we got to where we are, how that makes us and shapes us today. But most importantly, how we are wrestling for the authorship of what happens next in that story. You can't see yourself as a part of the larger story unless you understand your own. So that's my number two advice.
So ask questions and guide and know your story. I'm thinking I've got like 8 more questions I want to ask Kamau, everyone. I'm not going to ask all 8 of those because I want to leave some space for you. And I know that we have a question already in our chat box as well. We're going to try to combine a couple and then get out of the way to leave some space for Kamau if you want to say anything else, or for any of your questions, friends. But I know that, oftentimes, Kamau, when we talk about community organizing, we have folks that either say like I can't do that, or just building community, go bigger than community organizing, just trying to go outside of our own network, our own connections. And folks will say, I'm just so busy, I don't have time, to add more relationships in or to do that type of work. How am I going to find that time? Or they simply say, I don't know how to do that. I want to, connect with people that aren't like me, or connect over an issue, or just simply to connect, to build relationship, especially as we're socially distant. So you've offered, ask guiding questions. You've also offered, know yourself. Any more advice, like how do we make time or find time, or how do we reach out to start building those relationships with folks to build community?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As far as your time, I know all of us are juggling incredible plates that are just all over the place and in the air. Find your line with what you are able to dedicate your time to, and to dedicate that time especially well. I wish I'm hearing my mom's voice. She was like, I wish there were 36 hours in a day so I could do more. And that's where I'm at. But I would say that, your time would be best spent sharing the work with people so that way it's not entirely on your shoulders. Um, when you are able to trust the folks in the room to carry the work with you, y'all could get so much more done within whatever period of time that you have. As far as connecting with those groups, I would ask the question, well, what's available? I know that Pastor Nathan, that y'all are running that social justice task force. Just finding and organizing a home is going to be critically important. Just a group to plug into to see regularly, even if that means folks on this call creating a team to do whatever it is that y'all want to do. If it's around election stuff, that's great. If it's around Black Lives Matter, that's great. I know that I have a link that I'd like to share in the chat about civic engagement stuff. I can talk about that later, but um, yeah, just find an organizing home to plug into regularly. And don't be afraid if it's like a new group and you don't know what's going on. I had no idea about 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 the group that I was meeting up with when I went to Ferguson. I actually met them in Ferguson in a Popeyes parking lot. I was hanging out with, do y'all know Brother Jeff? Yeah. All right. So I was hanging out with Brother Jeff, a community organizer based here in East Denver. And we were chilling in the parking lot in Ferguson, in a white truck, a white, like a small bus pulled up, and Anthony Grimes and a whole bunch of other organizers stepped out, and they were arguing with each other, just really going at it because something happened at a protest and one of them got arrested. They were heated. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, like who am I getting myself involved with if they're arguing and bickering with each other this much? So I had to dive right in. But as soon as I found an organizing home within them, I was able to find community with them and trust and love and a shared commitment to do this work. So I would say how to get involved, just find a group and do it. It sounds like there's one real close. Yeah.
Thank you, Kamau. Yeah, building community and relationships. We haven't talked about this yet. We won't go too far, but is risk, right? You're being vulnerable, willing to risk yourself. For you, that was going to that parking lot and entering into those conversations, amongst many other risks that you took in that story and have taken since then. So I'm going to open it up to you all, friends. I know there are a couple of questions and comments in the chat box, particularly around Together Colorado and the work that Together Colorado does. That's a faith-based organization. We've heard today, as we celebrated our church's anniversary, of some of the way that our church historically and present and hopefully into the future will continue to be a place of community. So Kamau, some folks have mentioned the organizing call from a couple of weeks ago related around some of the election work that Together Colorado is doing. And then a more specific question that Karen asks says, are you involved in any demonstrations or community organizing regarding promoting voting rights, which I know that Together Colorado is. Will you say a little more about that? And then we'll be ready for you all folks to ask any additional questions you have. Come on.
Yeah. So great question. So my organizing home when it comes to electoral work is through Together Colorado. Just to make things real short, we are supporting ballot measure 118 to provide paid family medical leave, especially for the most vulnerable people in our state. And we are promoting that as well as encouraging people to vote through literature drops and text banks. Now we wanted to find the most COVID-friendly ways of both promoting 118 and encouraging people to vote. So I'm going to share a link in the chat. This was also shared during the civic engagement meeting that was referred to earlier. But the link includes, ways for you to sign up and find your own organizing home within, this electoral work as well. So I'm going to drop the link right now. So please feel free to sign up for those things. I hope I answered y'all's question. That's I'm not working with any other community organizing group, to promote voting rights so far as as far as that's concerned, Together Colorado is it for me.
Absolutely. Say a little more about what a lit drop and text banks are for folks that might not know what those are. Come on.
Yes, absolutely. So literature drops are rather than knocking on someone's door and having a conversation with them about an issue, it's pretty much just putting, like, for example, like a door hanger with the information on it onto their door or on the slot side of their door. It requires no contact with folks. Now, occasionally, people might see you coming up and a conversation might start. It's up to you to decide whether or not you want to engage with a conversation like that. But most times that doesn't happen. Uh, it's a great way of getting exercise, being in community with folks. So there's some pluses there. Text banking is a way to send pre-written text to voters within Colorado. So our goal is to reach some 72,000 registered voters in Colorado. And there are ways to, we're planning to do that in ways that, don't compromise any of your information. So nobody will see your personal phone number or even your whole name or where you are. But it's pretty much a program that's set up either on your phone or your laptop, and you just pretty much click a button and you send the information to voters. We found that text banking is an effective way to spread a message. And yes, so that's lit dropping and text banks. We're also doing some like voter protection work, such as poll watching and stuff like that. But that's requiring a little more detail. So I'll have more information about that later.
Great. Thank you, Kamau. Lorraine asks, many of us, people are continuing to text. Great job, everyone. I'm losing it. Here we go. I had to find where it was. Many of us have time as we are sequestered at our home or the letter writing campaigns that we can participate in. Chris Werner replies back, vote forward, and gives that website in the chat box. Any other ideas, Kamau, or work that you know about actual letter writing?
So unfortunately, I'm not connected to any efforts regarding letter writing. So looks like Christine is the go-to person for information about that.
Okay. Chris, do you know off the top of your hand? I know that before I left for vacation, there were a couple things that both discipleship and our missions team were partnering with related to getting out the vote and voter support partnering. I know with Together Colorado, but a couple other organizations too. Do you know those off the top of your head?
We suggested organizations that people could support. Some of those really just need your financial support. Stacey Abrams in Georgia is doing great work, of course, and so her Fair Fight organization, for example. Vote Forward is the one that I know of in terms of letter writing specifically. And then I participate in Sister District, which does text banking, phone banking, and financial support for candidates, primarily for state legislatures. Because this is just my personal viewpoint, but state legislatures are where redistricting happens, and state legislatures are where that, along with attorneys general, state attorneys general, are where preservation of voting rights happen. So Sister District, I think, was one of the organizations that helped turn the Virginia state legislature blue. And so that's an organization I personally support. And there are many others, but I'll just lift up those two.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And I know we put some of that info that we'll be partnering with as a church and our weekly email, an e-blast. So check that to reference some of the efforts that we'll be doing as a church. We'll have in a couple of weeks, be doing a short worship series for 3 weeks on the election and on voting, why that's important and how we can do that as people of faith, as Christians. So be looking for that info as well. I think as we talk specifically about community and the election or elections in general, we can begin to see how our idea of community might be changing, or how community isn't just about who lives here in our neighborhood or in our city or in our metro area, but really how sense of community, how we're partnered, how we're tethered together, yoked, to use a Christian word, right? From across our country, and how we impact one another. So it says Nikki and Vana. I don't know who asked the question specifically, Kamau, but it says, for those of us who are not people of color, we struggle with when our bodies versus our voices are needed. She writes, sometimes we need to just sit down, be quiet, and simply be present. And she says, would you mind pointing out one, two, or a few of the ways that you believe we are best suited to participate? So I think that's just in general.
So that's a mindful social justice question. I do like to push back on that perspective from time to time. Now, I see the value where it comes from, that there is a long historical precedence and present of white folks taking over people of color spaces. That is always something to be mindful of. I don't think the question white folks should be asking is when to step in and when to step back, but instead, I want white folks to ask how to step in differently. What often happens when white folks hang back and watch people of color do the work is that the entire burden of a social justice movement is placed squarely on the shoulders of the people most impacted by it. And when we're in a space where we are fighting for our lives and our rights, and white folks are watching us relive our trauma and our pain, that is equally as unhelpful as stepping in and, you know, taking full charge of the work and overshadowing people of color. What I want white folks to do is to, again, leading with another question, how can I as a white person be powerful in this moment? And what makes white folks powerful in the space of social justice is that y'all are able to do things and say things to other white people that people of color are not freely able to do. Your number one goal and task as a white person involved in a racial justice movement is to convert other white people to the side of anti-racism. That is the number one job of white people. Because whenever, you know, as Black folks and as brown folks, when we speak up about these things, we are often retaliated in our workspace. We are often the first to get arrested in a protest. We are often the first to lose our lives in some situations. And so as white people, it's not about when to hang back and you know, and to sit silently. I think it's to ask, how can I be powerful in this moment for this purpose? And one thing that I know I appreciate as a person of color is when a white person asks that, and they're just as present as the rest of us, and they're telling their story and really making sure that everyone's clear about their own skin in the game. I respect them more. I do. I respect people more who are fully involved and who are fully aware of their story and their self-interest in being here. So respectfully, I'm pushing back against that question and reframing it, because we want you involved at every step of the way. We just want you involved differently.
Great. Thank you, Kamau. All right, what other questions do we have? There's a comment in here about paid family leave. Invite folks to check that out. Nikki responds, got it. Thank you so much for an obviously thoughtful response. I'm totally on board. Thanking you, Kamau, for all the work that you do. She says, I've got to learn how to speak to other white people without losing her marbles, her quote, not mine. And then there's a comment, and I agree, that says Ruth Ann has been finding her power in that regard as far as challenging other white people to the work that we all need to do, but specifically that white people need to do. Are there other questions for Kamau? Yeah, Don?
You said that you were willing to be arrested, not willing to die, and I appreciate that. For both things. But as far as being arrested, is there some sort of fund or something that people can participate in to bond out people who've been arrested? is there an organized effort to raise money for that, specifically for that?
Great question. I love that question because one of my good friends and mentors actually runs the Colorado Freedom Fund. Her name is Elizabeth Epps, and she had created that Freedom Fund and the organization shortly after her own arrest, wrongful arrest and conviction by Aurora PD. And so they are the #1 go-to, at least within Denver and Aurora. They're constantly raising money, and I'm sure that they could always use some more. So please check out the Colorado Freedom Fund, and even visit Elizabeth Epps's Twitter page if you have any. I don't know if she's the best person to ask questions to. She's so busy, but please visit the website at the very least. So.
So we have probably time for another question or two. If anybody has anything else you want to ask Kamau while he's here with us. Okay, so Kamau, as they're gathering maybe their question, can you give us some contact information for you if folks want to follow up directly with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I can put that in the chat, although I did see Christina with her hand up.
Okay. So why don't you do that in the chat box, and then Chris, what's your question?
Well, sorry, I don't have a question, which is why I was waiting to the end, but I did want to remind people of our Race, Church, and Society meeting on Monday night at 6. You can see the link on the phunc.org website. And our topic this month is building relationships across the racial divide and other divides. So if you don't have information about that and you want to know more, you can email me, cwerner@bhfs.com. I think most of you have my email address. But I hope that you'll do that. And then we are trying to get started some additional opportunities for togetherness. But this topic on Monday, I think, is really important because in my mind, when we have those friendships, or we deepen the friendships that we have, when we listen to each other better and really understand one another's experience, that commitment to one another grows, and our willingness to put ourselves on the line and our willingness to feel that it's not about something that's happening to somebody else, it's about something that's happening to all of us, grows. So.
Thank you, Chris. So that'll be tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. That link is up on our website, as Chris mentioned, for our conversation tomorrow evening. It's the same link that we've been using for previous months. So if you have that Zoom link already, it'll be the same one to get you into the call tomorrow evening as we continue really the conversation about community and relationship. Kamau, are you okay with me reading your info here as out loud so that folks have it if they can't see the chat? Or you prefer me not to do that? Okay, no problem, just make sure. So Kamau Allen, his phone number is 720-607-5680, 720-607-5680, and his email is Kamau, Kamau, at togetherco.org, togetherco.org. That'd be a way to get directly in touch with him and get connected with some of the work that he's doing. Elizabeth Epps' organization's website has been posted as well in the chat. That's blackbailout.org, blackbailout.org. We'll put all that information down in the comment section when we post this up on YouTube. That way, if folks aren't able to be with us live, they'll be able to follow up with any of these links later when they're watching. So one more opportunity. If anybody has a final question or comment before we close in a word of prayer and give our appreciation again to Kamau Allen for joining us today. All righty, folks are clapping. Why don't we say a word of prayer and then we'll give an official clap and appreciation for you, Kamau. Let's pray, friends. Oh, gracious and most holy God, or Trinity, God, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the perfect example of community that we have. May we do our best to be in community with one another, to be willing to be vulnerable enough to put ourselves out there and to meet new people, to make new connections, to risk ourselves for the benefit of others as they risk themselves for us. Help us, oh God, to reach out to our family, our friends, others that are in our networks who might be experiencing loneliness, who might be experiencing isolation during this time of social distancing, during this time of the pandemic. God, continue to bind us with one another, even when we can't be physically with one another. Continue to show us new ways of being community with each other. Oh God, we lift up Kamau and the work that he is doing in his own life, personally and professionally. Continue to surround him with your protection, with your strength, with your encouragement. May we all indeed be able to find and discover where our line is and do this work that you have called us to do together as a community, knowing that indeed you are in communion with each and every one of us. It's in your Son's name and through the power of the Holy Spirit we offer this prayer together. And all of God's people said, amen.
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 Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, Kamau. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us all today. We'll see you all soon. Hope to see you in worship on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Have a good day, everyone. God bless.
Yeah.